All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hello everyone. Thank you for joining us on today's webinar, Digital Forensics and Incident Response. Is it the career for you? My name is Camille Dupuis, and I will be moderating today's webinar. I'll go ahead and introduce our speakers in just a few minutes, but first we would like to explain a few tips just to make sure that this webinar is interactive and engaging for our audience. So as listeners, you are on listen-only mode. This means that you're muted, but you're more than welcome to ask questions at any time, and go ahead and type those into the control panel's question feature. We'll save a few minutes at the end to get some of those questions answered. And if you are looking for continuing professional education credits, this webinar may qualify. So after the webinar is over, you will receive a follow-up email to the email address that you registered with, and that will include a form to fill out in order to request your completion certificate. You'll then be able to send that certificate into your certifying body. And just a reminder to go ahead and check with your certifying body, as the requirements can vary of what qualifies as a CPE for your organization. And the follow-up email will also include a copy of this webinar and the webinar slides. So we will go ahead now and move on to the good part, which is introducing our speakers. So first, I'd like to pass it off to my colleague, Jeff Peters. He is the product marketing manager here at Infosec.
Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us. Really excited to have with us today Cindy Murphy, the president at Gillware Digital Forensics. Cindy Murphy is, as I mentioned, the president of Gillware Digital Forensics, which is an incident response, cyber risk management, and digital forensics firm based here in Madison, Wisconsin, along with Infosec. She is a prominent figure in the digital forensics industry with over 20 years of experience. She began her career in the military and then law enforcement, where she first established the Madison Police Department's Digital Forensics Unit. She has instructed thousands of digital forensics professionals across the globe and continues to lead the Gillware team as it investigates incidents such as ransomware attacks, business email compromise, intellectual property theft, insider threats, and more. So very excited to get her insight knowledge on all of that and what it is like to be a digital forensics professional. Thanks for joining us today, Cindy.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Yeah, so what you can expect from today's webinar, we're going to talk just a little bit about, what digital forensics and incident response is in general. Then we'll get some advice from Cindy on, how you can get started in, as a DFIR professional and, how she got started in there. We'll talk about a few of the different career paths, some of the skills and job tasks that you could do as a digital forensics and incident response professional. And then I think the bulk of the webinar we'd really like to use to, kind of go through some of those like case studies or examples of actual, incidents or jobs that you would actually be doing, as an entry level or mid-level or, senior person in the field, and, get some good stories around that. And then, we'll save some time for Q&A. And also, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, feel free to drop them in the question panel, and we'll be sure to keep this pretty informal and ask Cindy along the way. So yeah, to get started, maybe we should talk a little bit about, what is DFIR? I have a little bit of knowledge about it, through some of the courses that we teach here at Infosec, but I guess how would you explain what it is that you do, Cindy, to someone?
Well, there are all sorts of technical explanations, but I think one of the best ways to explain it is to say that if you want a career where you're never, ever going to be bored, this might be a good career to look at. It is ever changing, ever growing, and ever expanding. And so while what we do is investigate incidents that happen on computer networks or individual computers, we look at data to try to recreate what happened, or to try to figure out the root cause of an incident, and to try to help an individual or a company or an organization better secure their networks. Really, that can include, you know, endless sorts of things. You have to have a little bit of knowledge about all sorts of different subjects, and there's a lot of specialization in the field. I mean, we're talking about everything from cell phones and SIM cards and flash memory to, you know, 2,000, 3,000, 50,000 machine networks. And so there's a lot of ground in this industry to cover. And there's really, you know, aside from the technical portions of this work, there's a lot of people work. In other words, teaching people about social engineering and how to harden the human network against these attacks, teaching people smart computing habits. So, so it's a great field, super interesting, and as broad or as narrow as you need it to be.
Yeah, I guess when I think about it as an outsider, I always picture you guys as like little digital Sherlock Holmes type characters. I don't know if you think that that's accurate. Is that like a
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of digital Sherlock Holmes and a little bit of mad scientist, computer scientist, right? There's a lot, because computers, operating systems, technology are always changing. We often have to figure things out as we go, and that takes a great deal of problem solving, puzzle working, and you know, so not only the investigative side of things, but from a sleuth standpoint, but also from a scientific standpoint. What made that happen? How do I prove that that's what made that happen? So it's a little bit detective and a little bit scientist.
Yeah, so we have someone asking a question. Would you classify DFIR as a blue team?
I would say blue team is part of DFIR, and so, you know, we have digital forensics, we have incident response, we have the red teams that that look for and attack systems. The blue we've got purple teams. Everybody is trying to wrap their minds around this. So we have malware analysis that would fit in. We have all of those incident response pen tester roles, proactive response roles. So yeah, I would say those fit in. Network security is part of digital forensics and incident response, because we have to have those knowledge bases in the jobs that are in this sector.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, before we get too far down the road into like the actual job duties, maybe we could sort of set the stage with how you got started, and I guess, was it a career that you always wanted to pursue, or something you kind of fell into, or how'd you get involved?
Well, funny you should say. I literally fell into this career. And so my path is maybe a little different than other people's might be. I started in the military at 18 years old as a military police officer. And policing is what I wanted to do with my life. I felt a call to serve, and I'm also a very active person, and like to help people and like to figure things out. So I got into policing and started my digital forensics career in 1998 after being injured on duty and being assigned on light duty to help an older detective, John Mulcahy's his name, who was working on one of the first computer crimes ever investigated by Madison Police. Someone had stolen physical signatures out of historical books at the State Historical Library, and they were selling those on on bulletin boards and news groups on the on the internet, which was a very different place in the 1990s than it is now. And so that was the first investigation I worked on at that point. There were no standardized methods for doing drive imaging. There were no standardized methods for for doing the investigations on that host machine to prove things. So it was at the ground level. It turned out that there was a computer system from MIT involved in this, and so one of my very first contacts in this investigation was with Owen Casey, who was at the time working at MIT, and obviously he and I have developed a long-term friendship past that. We really didn't figure out again until 2012 that one of my first investigations and his first investigations were connected to each other, but we had parallel paths as a result. So lots of lucky pieces, but really I literally fell into it.
Yeah, I mean, I imagine it's changed quite a bit since, stealing signatures to now. I mean, probably a huge question, but is there anything, you think is like the biggest change or has had the biggest impact on professionals?
Well, I think, Moore's law, right? The size of the hard drives getting huger and huger over time, and the amount of data that we're dealing with over time has just increased exponentially. Around that same time, 1998, my father gave me a um, a gigabyte hard drive for Christmas. This is the amount of change we've gone through since the 90s, and said that's the largest drive you'll probably ever need. My dad was not um, a, a stupid man, and he was very computer savvy. He was a professor at the University of Iowa, and was spending his time processing on data cards and reel-to-reel tape in the Blue Room at the University of Iowa, and so that's where I spent my formative years. But I don't think we understood in 2000, in the mid to late 90s, how things were going to look in 2020, how things were going to look in 2019. Whether it's cell phones and the fact that computing power has become ubiquitous around us, in people's pockets everywhere they go, or whether we're talking about just the amount of data collection that happens on any individual, all of those things have to do with the amount of data in the world. So I think that's probably the biggest change.
Yeah, if we can, maybe shift gears a little and talk about some of the potential careers. Obviously, as you mentioned, it's a pretty wide field. There's tons of different stuff that you could do. I guess in my mind, I've kind of broken it down into, public sector versus private sector, and then maybe people who are doing more forensics versus responding to different types of incidents. I don't know if you'd break it down in a similar way, or how would you describe the different types of roles?
Yeah, I think this is a good broad breakdown. Public sector forensics is where I cut my teeth in the industry, and maybe actually a harder place to get into in terms of starting a forensics career. Most police departments still operate on a seniority level. So if you go into your career saying, hey, I want to become a computer forensic examiner for a police department, I want to fight child exploitation in that way, you're likely going to have to become a police officer first. And then you're going to likely have to work in the field as a police officer for several years before you're eligible to promote to a position where you're doing crime scene forensics, or detective work, or promote into a digital forensics position. So the structural setup of law enforcement agencies is such that it makes it somewhat hard to break into that world unless you're wanting to be a cop too. Now that has started to change. There are regional crime labs and individual police departments that hire civilians specifically to do digital forensics work. So that is slowly changing. I wish it would change faster. And of course, at the state and federal levels, you may find direct entry civilian digital forensics work as well. So. But yeah, this is usually doing cell phone forensics and computer forensics. So looking at individual machines or sets of machines, devices like SIM cards and SD cards, and you name it. Really, it could be anything for evidence of a criminal activity. In the private sector, we do much the same work. We're supporting investigations into data theft, civil litigation work. There's a lot of financial crimes that get prosecuted civilly rather than in the criminal courts. We also do data breach investigations, look at insider threats, malware investigations, cybersecurity incidents, and those sorts of things. We also support law enforcement. So at Gillware here, we do a certain amount of forensics still for law enforcement when law enforcement doesn't have the resources, or there's some technical issue that they're unable to get around with the equipment and software they have. If they need some custom work done, either repairing a device or some complex problem, they will come to a private company such as ours. And then incident response would be support of those incident response issues, the cybersecurity incidents, and so you can see these sort of cross back and forth into each other. And I guess we also have those proactive sorts of roles, proactive services, the folks who are doing the network security surveys ahead of time, the folks who are doing pen testing and making sure networks are safe, as safe as possible before an incident happens. So so that maybe fits into there as well. There's there are no real borders between these jobs, which is probably good, because my digital forensics experience works really well when we're looking at incident response cases. Those skills that I learned about looking at registries, looking at link files, looking at whatever the forensic artifact is, all apply really well to incident response. But if there were that that wall between those jobs, it would be a lot less. There would be a lot less flexibility there.
Yeah, I wonder if you could maybe like walk us through a particular case or a typical case. Like what is the process? You mentioned like investigating stuff on computers and mobile devices. Like where do you start with that, and what's the goal? And then is it like a whole team of people doing it, or is it one person that kind of handles one particular case, or is it broken down by kind of activity that you're doing?
Sure. Well, I think that's going to depend on the organization you're working for. Here at Gillware, we're very collaborative, and we try to leverage the skills that our employees have to work in teams on problems. So if we talk about a typical incident response kind of case, I'll take one of the most common, ransomware. Somebody has a ransomware attack. They've been affected by whatever the variant is, and they will typically either come to us directly or through their insurance provider, or through whatever the referral is. But the first thing we're going to do is have a what we call a scoping call to try to figure out the scope of that incident. And if we look at the incident response process, this is part of preparing and identifying, right? We're preparing for our investigation, but we're trying to identify the scope of the incident, and we find out as much as we can. And what is that network topography? How many machines are on that network? How many of those were affected? We're trying to identify, all of the virtual and physical servers involved, all of the workstations that are involved, and get a picture of what that looks like from that standpoint. And then we're going to try to figure out, what do they know about what happened? Has there been a progressive spam campaign ahead of this? Are we dealing with potentially Emotet or TrickBot that has dropped a Word document with PowerShell scripts, and then that was the precipitating event to the ransomware event? So we sit down, we have that call to identify those sorts of factors. Who is going to be our main point of contact from a technical standpoint? Who is going to be our main contact from an administrative standpoint? And what are their goals? What's most important to them to get back? And also, what are their responsibilities? Are they in a field or a sector where data is protected? Are they healthcare? Are they storing PII or payment information? And do they have a regulatory requirement to report? And in those cases, we're going to need to know more about, we're going to have to do a deeper investigation to see whether data was exfiltrated, whether it left that network. And so we're going to have to do forensic examinations on a number of workstations and servers in that environment. And so once we have that scoping call taken care of, we then work on identifying what we need to collect immediately, and how we're going to do that. At the same time, we're working on trying to contain and eradicate and recover from the incident. So there's a lot going on in those first 24 hours or so. And it may include engaging with a ransomer to start again that process of negotiating a ransom. Doesn't necessarily mean we're going to pay it, but we want to get the information we can from that incident about what's involved in that side. So a lot's going on. Once we get that data in, then we're looking for specific samples of malware in that system, both from the standpoint of that initial infection vector. We're looking for how their systems were breached, and we're also looking for that executable file that was the ransomware. We want to know if it is capable of data exfiltration, or if something ahead of time was capable of data exfiltration, and then we just work it through. And it's you have to remind yourself, how do you, it's the old proverb, how do you eat an elephant? One spoonful at a time, right? You take this huge problem and you break it down into the smallest, most important parts, and you tackle them one at a time. So obviously this is easier with a team of people who specialize in different areas. And we have folks who are really good at looking at malware, folks who are really good at encryption problems, folks who are really good at, if we get a decryptor and it doesn't work right, modifying that decryptor so that it will work right. And we have folks that are really good at the part about containment and eradication. Are we going to deploy Carbon Black or Sophos or another tool on that network? Do they already have one deployed? Do they even know what all their endpoints are? And you'd be surprised at how often they don't. So there's, like I said, a lot going on, and so those blue team, red team, purple team, pen testing experiences can all be brought to bear to give us a good broad perspective on efficiently and effectively responding to the problem.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like it's a lot of different pieces along that process. Is there any particular spot that or type of work that you enjoy doing the most when it comes to that, or anything that you enjoy doing the least?
So it's a question of that word enjoyment, right? Like it's all of us. I enjoy doing the things I know the best, which is host machine forensics, right? Like figuring out what and when what the breach was when it happened, and then what the bad guys did when they were in the machines, how they moved laterally across from machine to machine. But I also enjoy being out of my comfort zone, right? So, so working with and learning from the folks who are doing that containment and eradication side of things is really rewarding for me. In law enforcement, so 31 years of first try not to change anything, right? Like make sure you're not changing that original evidence. When we get into incident response cases, we're going to be making changes, right? We have to, in order to secure the network that we can't totally bring down while we're doing the investigation. So so all of it for me is enjoyable, and I really enjoy looking at the malware itself, trying to decompile it, unpack it, look at what's going on underneath the surface. And while I'm not a programmer, it's really interesting for me to look at what's there and to try to figure out what's happening. And obviously, there are great tools for that help us do that. Some of them free. There's all sorts of sandboxes out there that will pull things apart and give you more information about them. But I like it all. That's why I'm still doing it all this time later.
Yeah, well, that's always good. Yeah, I think maybe we should talk a little bit about how people can get started, or I guess you mentioned you have a pretty strong team. Different, as imagine, you're hiring people. So people who are listening, whether they're here live or gonna watch or listen on demand later, is there anything in particular that you look for? I guess we could start with like the education standpoint when it comes to digital forensics. Do you prefer people? Do you think you get a lot of value out of going to school and getting a degree, or do you look for certifications or anything along those lines?
So I think all of the educational options are good ones. When you're in a digital forensics position where you're likely to be in court, um, doing straight machine forensics or doing civil litigation work in the private sector or in law enforcement, having formal training, certification, and formal education is really helpful for building your curriculum vitae, your CV, and showing the court your background and expertise in an area. It looks better to a jury, to a judge, to attorneys to have that formalized education. Um, but that doesn't mean that's the end all be all, right? I ended up learning very experientially to start with in my formative years, and then moved to a more formalized training through National White Collar Crime Center, through um, what was then NCASE and FTK, through those vendor supported training programs, through the SANS Institute, and then decided, hey, I keep learning these same things over and over again. I kind of want to go beyond that and decided to do my master's degree in forensic computing and cybercrime through University College in Dublin. All of that was focused on building my credentials as an individual, but also building my my knowledge about what I was doing as I was doing it. Um, Informal training, though, can't be underestimated either. Those people who come in as a candidate who have some formalized education but are also running their own personal sandbox, they've set up their own network, they might be running a honeypot, or they might be experimenting with some scripting, or some they've got hobbies. They're in the tech area. um, those people are really interesting to us because it shows that not only are they going to school to do this, but they're also interested in it outside of their formal education. So I think a mix of those things is really good. I'm while I have a law enforcement background, I realize that many hackers are not criminals, right? Like, they're just curious human beings who are exploring technology deeply and figuring out how to do things. I uh, I probably, if I weren't in law enforcement, would have been considered a hacker growing up. So that's not a negative thing, but it is something where people have to be able to fit those tendencies into some rules and restrictions and boundaries, right? Because you can't either in the private sector or the public sector just do what you want, right? Like, there has to be some structure wrapped around all of it. But I think both formal and informal education are important. I want to just move on to skills.
Sure. Well, one question I had was a lot of the people that we talk to, or when you see surveys about like cybersecurity professionals, there seems to be a lot of confusion, or I guess uncertainty about career
Mhm.
paths. As you mentioned, there's just so many different things, even within digital forensics, you can do. So, didn't know if you had any advice for people who are listening, or maybe they're interested in the field, but they're not sure which of the dozen sub roles is for them. Is there?
Yeah, I mean, I think trying to balance yourself between good general knowledge and some specific subset of interest, some specialization is a positive thing. You don't want to walk into a job interview and say, "Hey, I'm an expert at cell phone forensics, and I want to do a job that is primarily incident response." You can be an expert at cell phone forensics, and that's a really great experience. But I also am going to want you to know a lot about incident response. See what I mean? So,
Mhm.
so make sure you get that good broad coverage in your educational background. Um, but also pursue the things that interest you, and you're going to find that somebody needs that area of expertise.
Mhm. Yeah, so when you talk about like certain skills, is there any like particular tools that people should know, like, that are generally used a lot in the field, or any particular skills or processes, or kind of anything that, hey, if you're in this field, you should really be able to talk about this, at least at the surface level?
Oh, see, now you and I are going to go in really different directions on this. So I want people who have hard skills and soft skills. I want people who are able to talk to other people and explain difficult
Hmm.
concepts in simple ways. I want people who are good at writing, who have good grammar, and who write clearly and concisely, and can express technical things in simple words on paper. Um, and and I want people who can present to non-technical people what they've learned about the technology. Um, I want people who are curious, people who are passionate about what they do, and people who are flexible, flexible enough to say, "I don't know that, but I'm going to learn it." I haven't done that before, but I want to, right? And so, yes, there are tools that are used all of the time in this field. You know, but if you've used one forensic suite, you should be flexible enough to take those skills and figure out how to use another, right? Not to say that you're going to become an expert at it, but if you've been using Ncase and you walk into an organization where they primarily use something else, whether it's Magnet or whether it's X-Ways or Forensic Explorer, I'm hoping that you're going to have enough technical savvy and intuitive knowledge of user interfaces to figure out the software. I'm more interested in your problem solving behind that. When you use that software, what are you looking at? What are you tearing apart, and what are you digging deeper into? If you see what I mean. So,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, you need to learn the basics. You can learn the basics of imaging through, you know, FTK Imager. Um, the next time you use a different tool to do your imaging, those concepts should be there. I'm going to have my original evidence. I'm going to have a target device. I need to know how to set up the paths to both of those and then make the software work. And then I need to know to go back and verify my image and what that means conceptually, right? But those concepts are supported by the different kinds of software that we use. And I don't want someone who knows Ncase so well that they don't have enough flexibility to go and use a different tool,
Mm-hmm.
if you know what I mean.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
rather than teaching the tools, I would like to see people with a broad a broad level of knowledge that that whatever tool they have access to, they're going to use that to figure out what they need to know.
Mm-hmm.
um, so yeah, and I guess another thing is I like people who read. People don't read enough these days, and I mean we could go back to RTFM. I won't won't say the acronym out loud, but um, uh, reading and having a voracious appetite for reading means that you're going to be able to figure things out.
Mm-hmm.
So we find a lot of people that end up shortcutting. They want to be hand-fed an answer in 40 characters or less, and that's not always possible, especially when we're looking at some of the more complex systems and concepts involved in these fields.
Yeah, we did some research earlier this year, and we found that I think it was 92% of all the InfoSec professionals we surveyed said they're learning new skills every single month. So it sounds like that's kind of, I guess I hear that from a lot of people I talk to. That's really what they're looking for more when hiring is people who are curious and want to learn and are willing to, kind of continually learn all those new things. That,
Yeah, and I mean, and the goal should be for anybody who's teaching in this field to teach people how to learn, right? Like teach people how to do basic science, right? Like how to test things and change one variable at a time and rerun your test and see what changed and figure things out. So if you're a person who knows how to learn new things, you're going to be successful in this field.
mm-hmm. Yeah, we have another question that came in from, looks like Cynthia. She asked if is there any demand for digital forensics professionals right now? I mean, I would assume the answer is
Oh
probably yes,
gosh.
but I don't know, maybe you could put
Yes,
that in context of like over your career. Is there more demand now or less, or how do you?
there is huge demand for digital forensics, incident response, and network security folks. Uh, Not only in the private sector, but in the public sector. There's a huge shortage of people with these skill sets, with the technical skill sets and those soft skills. Those two things together are super important. But if we just take my company, Gillware has been around for 3.5 years, roughly. Um, and in that first year, it was me doing the forensics, and then and Nathan Little came on board to do forensics as well. And these days we are hiring literally 3 to 6 people per month, and we need more. We need more good candidates at all levels, and I'm talking about people who want to get into this job at the entry level as interns or co-ops, people who have a tiny bit of experience and want, you know, want to get in as a beginning forensics or incident response person, people who have that experience and want to do it at a higher level and run their own cases, run their own scoping calls, and you know, work at the director level, and also people who want to support this work, folks who can answer phones and speak intelligently to the questions that our customers are asking or prospective customers are asking, and people who have the skills to do the marketing work in this area. So people who have the skills to organize the evidence, right? Like we need all of those functions, and we're also looking for people who have general IT skills to help us after an incident, help our customers get back to where they need to be in a secure way. So and you know, our proactive services side is also looking for people. So we are growing as fast as we can in this field. I don't think it's too controversial for me to say that among incident response and forensics companies, we aren't competitors with each other for getting work. There's more work out there than any of us can handle on our own. We're competitors in terms of getting people. So you will see a lot of cybersecurity companies trying to poach each other's people, and that shouldn't necessarily, that wouldn't necessarily be the case if we had enough folks coming in with the skills and educational background that we need.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's a huge demand.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you a little bit about some of the like entry level stuff, because that seems to be, I guess, a little bit of the, I don't know, pushback or stuff you hear. You know, when you go on forums, a lot of people like they know there's a lot of opportunity in cybersecurity and they want to break in, but maybe they have a little bit of difficulty kind of like seeing the path in. So maybe talking a little bit about experience. Is there anything in particular that someone can do to like start getting that experience? I know you mentioned like setting up honeypots and things, but if someone wanted to sort of stand out from the crowd so that way they apply for an entry level job, is there anything in particular you look for along those lines?
Yeah, I mean, there are, and I think there is a disconnect here, right? We keep talking about all of these jobs, but people say, "Hey, I put my application out there and nobody picks me." I think part of this is those, again, those soft skills. If you want to stand out in this crowd, take the time to send a thank you card after you get an interview. You'll probably get hired. That's my tip for people. Okay, so I don't know how many people are currently or will be listening to this, but if you want to stand out, work on those people skills. Like connect with the people that you're trying to apply with, because that will make you stand out in the crowd. Send a physical card, send an email follow-up, take the time to pick up the phone and call back afterwards, and keep your name and your resume at the top of that pile. Have a resume that doesn't look like everybody else's resume, right? And really focus on bringing out your quirks and your humanity in that resume. It's really effective, because if we're looking through resumes, your resume, honestly, the first time around is probably going to get 5 minutes or less time in review. People are going to look, and if you have exactly the same experience as everybody else in that pile, if there's something that makes you stick out, whether it's volunteering in in your local school to help people who need to have malware cleaned off their computers, or whether it's I'm trying to think of some, whether it's volunteering to help secure a network, or whether it's an internship at a police department in the forensics lab, or whether it's those sorts of things. You have to be a little bit creative and put yourself out there. And I think you also have to express that willingness to do anything. Um, uh, People misinterpret sometimes those entry-level positions as I'm applying for this position. This is the position I want. And if we've already made a selection for that position and you haven't said, hey, I will literally do anything in your company to get my foot in the door, the person who says that is probably going to get hired before you. So, so don't, just because there's a job description out there, or you've applied for a particular position, make sure you make it clear that you're really basically willing to do other job roles in order to get your foot through the door.
Yeah, let's. We got about 10 or 15 minutes left here. Maybe we could share just a couple more examples of types of things that types of cases or interesting things that you work on. I know we talked a little bit about ransomware. One interesting thing that kind of piqued my attention was in your bio, you talked about business email compromise. So I know that's extremely common. I'm just curious how that relates to forensics and incident response and anything you do around that.
Sure. Well, and it also relates to ransomware. So, as people know, phishing, whether it's spear phishing or the regular variety, is just absolutely rampant. And many of those phishing attempts either come with a weaponized attachment, or with a link to go provide your credentials. Those credentials, when harvested, can then be used to get into somebody's account and then set up forwarding rules, or to add new users. And at that point, generally an attacker will sit in an email system and just monitor, and then at a auspicious time jump into a conversation and redirect funds, or use that information to move further into a network and out of the email system. And we often see that those business email compromise cases come hand in hand with a subsequent ransomware attack. And so it's just a chain in the monetization of of that compromise. And so oftentimes when those business email compromise cases come in, it'll be, hey, I work for such and such a company. We had a wire transfer fraud, for $1.3 million, and we need to know where it came from, because while it says it came from this email address, we're not seeing it in the inbox and the outbox, where we can't find this email. What happened? And so we'll see upon further investigation that that they had a relationship with a vendor. Somebody found out about this relationship from a vendor because it was proudly announced on a website someplace, and so they developed an email address one letter off, or something similar to that, and just cold emailed in, and started into a conversation and said, hey, we've changed our bank account information due to fraudulent activity. Here is the new routing number and bank account number. So the next time you pay the invoice, send it here. And then nobody catches that it came from the wrong email address. It gets forwarded to the finance folks who think they're taking an instruction from someone above them, and they dutifully change the the bank account number and the routing information. And the next time that invoice gets paid, it gets paid to someone who it shouldn't go to. And a couple months later, when the legitimate company says, "Hey, this invoice went unpaid, we need to collect," and they go, "Nope, we paid that," then people figure out something happened, right? So there's kind of a man in the middle attack there, but it's a very common sort of attack. We also get straight up data theft investigations. We have hired a new employee. The employee came to us from a different company, and we've just received a letter telling us that we have to hold all data associated with this person because they took data with them when they left their previous company, or alternatively, we believe when this guy left or this gal left, they took with them our proprietary information. And so in that case, we're looking for, there's a traditional forensics role there. We're looking for around the time the person left, did they insert a USB device to that computer? Are there link files showing what they accessed? Did any of that material end up on the new employer's network? Was there a cloud account involved? Those sorts of things. So it's pretty general, but it gives you an idea. We also get occasionally the spy versus spy sort of case. I am a reporter for a national level a news outlet, and I believe that that someone has been intercepting my emails. They know where I'm at, where I'm going to be. They know confidential information that's provided to me by a source. And so we will look at computers sometimes looking to see if there's been spyware involved. Sometimes it has to do with a firmware compromise, and or something like that. We also will look at very low level at flash memory. What's going on underneath the flash translation layer? Can we recover data from flash memory, even if our forensics tools show us that it's all zeros? And the answer is yes, you can, which is really part of the reason I left law enforcement to come to the private sector. Is that realization that there's a lot possible that I was unaware of, and so it was the lure of something new to learn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it looks like we're getting pretty close to the end here. So if you guys have any other questions, feel free to throw them in the chat. I know we got a few coming in that Camille's monitoring. Before we get to questions, just wanted to mention that anyone who's watching today gets a free week of training with Infosec skills. There's a couple ways you can train with Infosec. We have our Infosec Flex boot camps with different digital forensics and computer mobile forensics incident response boot camps. But then we also have our new product that we launched this year, Infosec Skills, which I think is really great for people trying to really explore forensics, because you can go in and there's more than 500 courses, and you can just kind of play around and try to get a sense of what you're like if you're one of those people who maybe is a bit uncertain on what career is for you. So if you go to infosecinstitute.com/skills, you can sign up, free week, and then it's $34 a month after that if you want to keep going after your free week is up. But with that, I will pass it over to Camille. She's monitoring the questions, and we'll close out with that.
All right, thanks, Jeff. And thank you, Cindy, so much for being on the webinar with us today. It's really been, interesting, and just to kind of hear about your job transition and kind of where you came from has really been interesting, and I think, inspiring. And coming from that, a lot of the questions are still regarding employment in the cybersecurity field. So again, I know you said it's changed quite a bit, but I think people are still kind of looking at some of the questions about getting into the field with, in terms of digital forensics and incident response, what are those, technical certifications, if you're familiar with any that would pop out to you on a resume, or just those technical skills? I know we kind of discussed this earlier, but if you have any more insight there, that'd be great.
Sure. So I think that that any certification you have is not a negative thing, and I think that
Right.
depending on the job function you're going for, you may find that there are requirements to have particular certifications. If your resume comes across my desk and you are a certified if you've got your ENCE, I know you're going to have basic skills in using NCASE to do forensics. If you're certified with FTK, I'll know you've got basic skills with that tool. It tells me something if you've done your CISSP, right? Like those things do help you to stand out. And if you have a particular job that you absolutely want to go after and they have a requirement, that makes sense to get that particular thing. That being said, after 30, 20 plus years in forensics and incident response, and 30 years in law enforcement, I understand that there are some people with 0 certifications that are extremely good at this work, and there are people who have alphabet soup behind their name who spend all of their time working on their certifications and none of their time actually practicing the work. And certifying for this work and doing this work are two very different things. So, while I will place a certain amount of weight on the fact that somebody's taken the time and the effort to do a certification and to get recertified, and I know that it shows they have a basic level of knowledge and or skills in a particular area, it's never going to be the total differentiating factor for me. And those differentiating factors, for me as an employer looking at bringing people on, have to do more with a combination of the technical knowledge and skills and the people knowledge and skills. Are you good on the phone? Can you explain things that are hard in a way that's easy to understand? Do you write well? Or am I going to have to worry about every report that goes out the door? Is it going to take us a lot more time in peer review of reports? So again, if you're super good at the very technical stuff and you aren't able to express yourself well in writing or verbally, it makes it harder to make the decision to hire somebody. But if you have a combination of those skills and some certifications, that's certainly going to be a good solid candidate.
Sure. Thanks, Cindy. I think that's some really nice advice, and I think that's something that's starting to be a little bit more recognized in the industry is those soft skills, right? So
Yes.
I think that's important. I know we have an industry friend who says she translates geek speak, um,
Yes.
and I think that's kind of a fun way of saying it, but also really important for those that are looking for jobs and looking to get
If
into the
I can,
industry.
sure, if I can just hop in and say one last thing while we have a
Right.
little time.
Yes.
um some people say, or they say, but you can't teach me that, right? Like you can't teach me to be comfortable speaking or to say things more simply or to express myself better in writing. I'm either good at it or I'm not, and I'm here to tell you those are things you can learn as well. So so for people who know they're strong in the technical areas but have some concerns about those soft skills, those are definitely things you can learn.
Sure. Thank you, Cindy. That's good advice, and I think that answers several of the questions, kind of in the question panel. So thank you, everyone who participated and asked questions today. So this is kind of wrapping up our session here. So once more, thank you, Cindy and Jeff, for a fascinating presentation today, and also to everyone for joining the webinar and those asking questions and participating in that way too. So as we wrap up here, just wanted to let you know that you can watch for the recording of the webinar coming in your email soon. And if you'd like more information right away about Infosec, you can head over to our website, infosecinstitute.com, or you can call to speak with a rep, if you're interested in a course or anything. And we'd appreciate if you'd share your thoughts and experiences by filling out a real quick survey that will appear just as I close the webinar here. These answers can help us to better understand what folks are looking for in a webinar and make future webinars even better. And so to end here, if you have any other questions, you can email info@infosecinstitute.com and we will get back to you. Otherwise, have a great rest of your day, and thanks again to Cindy Murphy from Gillware for joining us.